brain is flexible. Neuroplasticity. The control of some specific bodily actions such as movement, vision, and hearing is performed in specified areas of the cortex. And if these areas are damaged, the individual will likely lose the ability to perform corresponding function. For instance, if an infant suffers damage to facial recognition areas in the temporal lobe, it is likely that he or she will never be able to recognize faces. On the other hand, the brain is not divided up in an entirely rigid way. The brain's neurons have a remarkable capacity to reorganize and extend themselves to carry out particular function in response to the need of the organism and to repair damage. Neuroplasticity refers to the brain's ability to change its structure and function in response to experience or damage. Our brains are most plastic when we are young children, as it is during the time that we learn the most about our environment. On the other hand, neuroplasticity continues to be observed even in adults. The principle of neuroplasticity helps us understand how our brain developed to reflect our experiences. For example, accomplished musicians have larger auditory cortex compared to the general population and also require less neural activity to move their fingers over the keys than do novices. These observations reflect the changes in the brain and there follow our experiences. Now, identifying the unique functions on the left and right hemispheres using split brain patients. We have seen that left hemisphere of the brain primarily senses and controls the motor movements on the right side of the body, and the right hemispheres of the brains are specialized to perform different functions. In this surgery, the region that normally connects the two halves of brain and supports communication between the hemisphere, known as the corpus callosum, is severed. As a result, the patient essentially becomes a person with home separate brains because the left and the right hemispheres are separated. Each hemisphere develops a mind of its own and with its own sensation, concepts, and motivations. In the research, Ganzia and his colleagues tested the ability of WJ to recognize and respond to objects and written passages that were presented to only the left or to the right brain hemispheres, visual and verbal processing in the split brain patient. The researchers had WJ look straight ahead and then flashed for a fraction of a second and a picture of geometrical shape to the left where he was looking. By doing so, they assured that because the two hemispheres have been separated, the image of the shape was experienced only the right brain hemisphere. Remember that the sensory input from the left side of the body is sent to the right side of the brain. The information is presented on the left side of a field of vision transmitted to the right brain hemisphere and vice versa. This research and many other studies following it has demonstrated that two brain hemispheres specialized in different abilities. Now we hop on to psychology in everyday life, why some people are left-handed. Across cultures and ethnic groups, about 90% of the people are mainly right-handed, whereas only 10% are primarily left-handed. This fact is puzzling, in part because the number of left-handers is so low, and in part because other animals, including our closest primate relatives, do not show any type of handedness. The existence of right-handers and left-handers provide an interesting example of relationship among evolution, biology, and social factors and how same phenomena can be understood at different levels of analysis. At least some handedness is determined by genetics. Ultrasound scans how 9 out of 10 fetuses stuck in the thumb in the right hand, suggesting that the preference is determined before birth. And the mechanism of transmission has been linked to the gene on X chromosome. It has also been observed that the left-handed people are likely to have fewer children, and this may be in part because the mothers on left-handers are more prone to miscarriages and other prenatal problems. There are both advantages and disadvantages to being left-handed in a world where most people are right-handed. One problem for lefties is that world is designed for the right-handers. Automatic teller machines, ATMs, classroom desks, scissor, microscopes, drill pressers, and table saws are just some examples of everyday machinery that is designed with the most important controls on the right side. This may explain in part why left-handers suffer somewhat more accidents than right-handers do. The fact that the left-handers excel in some sports suggests the possibility that they may have also an evolutionary advantage because their ancestors may have been more successful in important skills such as hand-to-hand combat. At this point, however, this idea remains only a hypothesis and determinants of human-handedness are not yet to be fully understood. So these were many things in chapter 3 until we come on to psychologists study the brain using different methods. One problem in understanding the brain is that difficult to get a good picture of what it is going on inside. But there are a variety of empirical methods that allow scientists to look at the brains in action, and the number of possibilities has increased dramatically in recent years in the introduction of new neuroimaging techniques in this section. There are so many things that come along with it. Perhaps the most immediate approach to visualizing and understanding the structure of the brain is to directly analyze the brains of human cadavers. Then we are going to have our next topic, that is lesions provide a picture of what is missing. An advantage to the cadaver approach is that the brain can be fully studied, but an obvious disadvantage is that brains are no longer active. In other cases, however, we can study living brains. The brains of living human beings may be damaged, for instance, as a result of strokes, falls, immobile accidents, gunshots, or tumors. These damages are called lesions. In rare occasions, brain lesions may be created intentionally through surgery, such as that designed to remove our brain tumors, as in split brain patients, and to reduce the effects of epilepsy. Psychologists also sometimes intentionally create lesions in animals to study the effect of their behavior. In so doing, they hope to be able to draw inferences about the likely functions of human brains from the effects of the lesions in animals. It is now known that a good part of our moral reasoning abilities are located in frontal lobe, and at least some of the understanding comes from lesion studies. For instance, consider the well-known case of Phineas Gage, a 25-year-old railroad worker who, as a result of an explosion, had an iron rod driven into his cheek and out through the top of his skull, causing major damage on his frontal lobes. Although remarkably, Gage was able to return to work, and after the wounds healed, he no longer seemed to be the same person those who knew him. The animal, soft-spoken Gage has become irritable, rude, irresponsible, and dishonest. Also, there are questions about the interpretation of the case study. It did provide early evidence that the frontal lobe is involved in the emotion and morality. Recording electrical activity in the brain. In addition to the lesion approaches, it is also possible to learn about the brain by studying the electrical activity regarding firing of its neurons. One approach primarily used with animals is to place detectors in the brain to study responses of specific neurons. Research using these techniques has found, for instance, that there are specific neurons known as feature detectors in the visual cortex that detect movement, lines and edges, and even faces. A less invasive approach, and one can be used in living humans, is electroencephalography (EEG). The EEG is a technique that records the electrical activity produced by the brain's neurons through the use of electrodes that are placed around the research participant's head. An EEG can show if a person is asleep, awake, or enthesiastic because the brain wave patterns are known to be different during each state. EEGs can also track the waves that are produced when a person is reading, writing, and speaking, and are useful for understanding brain abnormalities such as epilepsy. A particular advantage of EEG is that the participant can move around while the recording are being taken, which is useful when measuring brain activity in children who often have difficulty keeping still. Peeking inside the brain. Neuroimaging. Although the EEG can provide information about the general patterns of electrical activity within the brain, and although the EEG allows the researcher to see these changes quickly as they occur in real time. The electrodes must be placed on the surface of the skull, and each electrode measures brain waves from large areas of the brain. As a result, EEGs do not provide a very clear picture of the structure of the brain, but techniques exist to provide more specific brain images. Functional magnetic resonance imaging fMRI is a type of brain scan that uses magnetic field to create images of brain activity in each brain area.